project is not getting into the ground. That project is not getting into the ground, and we're still not going to see it emerge for use as housing stock for Rhode Islanders. Now, having said that, that's a dimension of the problem. We are moving these funds through the system with all the credit that I've expressed towards Rhode Island Housing and many stakeholders. So if you look at fiscal 24 to 26, the going forward in the development of affordable housing row, the first row, we've only got $25 million left going into the next fiscal year. That will evaporate rapidly. What this slide expresses is that we may have enhanced the number of projects going through the pipeline. We're going to see some more housing. It is not enough for us to continue the momentum, and the momentum that we've been generating while encouraging is not sufficient. We need new tools. We need more resources. We need to continue to rely upon the ones we've had or find, equivalent replacements. But in all likelihood, we're not going to do that. So we need to continue to dedicate general obligation bond funds for the production of affordable housing. We need to build upon the conveyance tax increments that are now pouring in for affordable housing purposes. But let's keep in mind, there are fewer conveyances. This market is so tight that we actually have fewer transactions. So that number is going to go down. Maybe it'll stabilize, but it will not be a source of increasing revenue for a time at least. We're grateful for that at long last permanent revenue stream. So we need to build upon that platform and have yet additional tools in order to fill project gaps and ensure that affordable housing developments happen. So let's go to the next slide. There are a variety of, let's go to that next one, and then we'll rewind. 6 out of 8 Northeastern states already have a companion for the federal LIHTC program, meaning the 4% and 9% low-income housing tax credit program of the federal government is a workhorse program that helps to produce affordable housing in our state, throughout the Northeast, and for that matter, across the whole country. 6 out of 8 Northeastern states have a companion program that's a state LIHTC that helps to fill the project gap that remains, especially under the 4% program. It can work under the 9% program in many cases too. And you can design the Rhode Island program, if there were to be one, to allow for interoperability across the two 4% and 9% subcategories. And you could design it to include evaluative criteria to ensure that the projects are the best fit for Rhode Island and that the projects are going to get done if you do make the allocation. But the fundamental point here is that we lack a tool that most of our neighboring states have, and that would be valuable as an interlock with the federal LIHTC to help produce more affordable housing units. With the falling off of the American Rescue Plan dollars, it would seem to me that we need a tool like this. Have we concluded definitively it must be a state LIHTC? No. Are we fully in dialogue regarding a design for this particular program and its introduction and advancing through the General Assembly? Not yet. But a program like it would seem to make sense as we aim to come from behind and do better than our peer states in the Northeast. Joey, why don't we rewind to the previous slide? There's a variety of ways that we might continue to resource affordable housing and in general, boost housing production and activity in the housing domain. These are just illustrations. I won't get into advanced detail today, but you see the state LIHTC program as the first item. There are also ways that we might want to think about partnering with municipalities in a variety of ways. I'll start with the second row, the TSI idea. On the commerce side of the house here in the state government, there are ways that you can partner as between the state and a municipality, where if the town offers a tax stabilization agreement to help fill a project budget's gap, the state can come through with a reimbursement for foregone revenue at a certain percentage. Should we consider doing that for affordable housing developments or for housing developments generally, where we can help incentivize a town to put skin in the game, and then the state follows through and does something similar, probably leveraging at the state at a lower percentage, a higher percentage contribution from the municipality. I'm jumping around here. Other municipal programs, we hear a lot from towns that they don't have the capacity to carry out the work, even if they wish to do it. i.e., if there are housing developments flowing through their planning, zoning, and development offices, such as they are, they don't have the staff to undertake the work. Might we consider a municipal fellows program where the state matches in some ratio funding from the locality, and we help to build out staff for development purposes, emphasis on residential development, so that we can actually get these projects through the municipal processes? Might we offer technical assistance more generally for cities and towns that are trying to undertake this work? Infrastructure investments. Many towns are legitimately expressing that they need to extend water or sewer lines, they need to reconfigure roadways. Whatever the case may be, should we be able to co-invest with a municipality that's willing to put skin in the game, and in fact, place some dollars into the underlying infrastructure necessary to activate a tract of land for residential development purposes? I want to take my hat off to Melina and thank her for being one of the people to introduce this concept, the last one, revolving fund to support preservation. When units are coming offline and there's an opportunity to intervene and secure them as affordable, ought we have a tool to do that? There are different configurations, different versions of that tool that may be possible. One might be a revolving fund, but should we aim to, in effect, extend deed restrictions through some resources and a tool for the purpose? These are a variety of possibilities. We haven't settled upon them yet, but we wanted to illustrate how we can continue the momentum that has begun using American Rescue Plan dollars. And thanks to all of your commitment and passion, how can we continue forward with some real resources and real mechanisms? Okay, next slide. I guess two forward, yeah. So we want to conclude by saying that we hope to partner with you all more and more over time. And we aim to do that in a way that enables us as the team at the housing department to be equal to the task. We want to, Katie, absorb the wisdom that's expressed at your forums and be able to translate that into action. We want to work more intensively on the homelessness front and help to protect more vulnerable Rhode Islanders. We want to produce more housing stock, but we need to have the personnel to do all of this work. Right now, it's 17 or 18 people, depending upon how you count at the housing department. That's not 70 or 80, that's 17 or 18 to undertake all this work. And we are, you can see on this slide, even if you just slice it on a proportionate basis, even if you compile the numbers on a proportionate basis by population, we are underdoing it. By the way, our closest, next comparable state is Connecticut, and on some measures, they're doing worse than we are on housing. So that shouldn't be our standard. But look at Massachusetts with FTEs just in their Department of Housing per million in population, 50 versus our, 16. So we need to bulk up our housing team, but we need to do it in an intelligent way to meet the challenges of our time. So let's go to the next slide. We want to look at the places where we are especially underserved with personnel. Homelessness, housing and production and preservation are areas that really stand out where we need some more help. So let's go to the next slide. So we've started to determine where we would recommend allocating personnel if the governor's proposal were to be fulfilled. The governor kindly and intelligently asked for 21 new staff members, which would still make us a small department in government. We still would be dwarfed by many of our state of Rhode Island sister and brother departments, but it would be a very good start. and we want to show you the kinds of buckets that we think that we need to allocate more personnel to. Certainly homelessness and vulnerable populations on the left here, individual family support, housing development. We need a proactive development function in our state, a set of professionals who are positioned to assemble land, assemble deals, advance transactions, community development, community engagement, including sustainability as a key goal, policy and planning. We need to actually undertake this work in a way that's thoughtful and planful, and operations and support, holding it all together. While on the topic of policy and planning, I do want to note that we view it as important that we undertake a planning process that goes well beyond the sprints that we're currently doing to stand up new programs, articulate new legislation, extend resources, carry out work. So we aim to undertake a broader, larger scale planning process. There is an RFP that my current team has inherited that I've inherited from the previous leadership here at the department, which involves a procurement for planners for this planning process. That procurement is very actively underway. There are reviews and dialogues underway regarding that. We'll know more in the relatively near term. This will be to be sure, a multi-month process. Some of the applicants are likely proposing longer term than months, than counted in months. Those determinations are to be made in concert with the final decisions regarding the planning process. But what I want to say is we aim to infuse the process with public input among the inputs, and with help from Melina and Katie, we're already setting forth plans for community input that may even precede the formal start of this new planning process, or may help to launch it, or both. And we're looking at the very beginning of May for an initial forum or summit or conference or gathering. And we're very grateful to Melina and Katie for their early input on how to do this. And we have a series of other stakeholders that have been helping us configure the possibilities. So we're grateful that these are in the works and will help us ensure that we are learning from you all, stakeholders, and from the public, and from individuals with lived experience in particular, in order to formulate our plans. I want to also say this. Within our challenges, there are pronounced challenges. One of them that we simply need to speak of plainly and with devotion is homelessness. And I just want to add some additional words on that point. We are in the process of, as best we can, identifying new sites for shelters and centers, and aiming to build towards a future with more permanent supportive housing, so that there isn't as much of a need. There will always be some need, but as much of a need for emergency measures. We also aim to move forward on the prevention front. And for example, preventing eviction is very important. And I look to colleagues such as Jennifer Wood, who have exercised such exemplary service and contributions on this front, and RILS, Rhode Island Legal Services as well. And I look to, I mean, so many folks on this line, Karen Santilli, for your array of services, some of which are known well and some of which are not, from building permanent supportive housing to the shelter work, to problem solving with individuals and families experiencing homelessness, to Eric Hirsch for your eloquence and your advocacy. There's so many folks on the line, but my point is we need to think of each of these problems in this manner: prevention, emergency solutions, permanent solutions, but homelessness perhaps especially so. And very grateful for all the work that's been happening among the stakeholders represented on this particular call, and for the opportunity to present. And however you see fit, Katie, ready to open it up or take whatever next steps you favor. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Secretary Pryor, for that overview and addressing some of the questions that I think folks had submitted in advance relative to sort of next steps, goals, priorities, and planning. But we're going to open it up for questions, but I did want to just share, reflect back some of the priorities that we have identified as a coalition, which I believe are in alignment to what the department is working on. And many of us, as you already said, we're stakeholders, we're committed to the issues and ready to work and support. So a couple things just to highlight are thinking about, you mentioned housing stability and eviction prevention, particularly thinking about what is it looking like in the landscape now that most of the funding for emergency rental assistance has been exhausted. And so that is something that we've been discussing as a coalition. In addition to investments in housing production and for affordable housing, but in particular, deeply subsidized affordable housing, permanent supportive housing, which we know can be challenging to fund, but looking at those financing tools, this has been very actively pursued this legislative session, but land use reform and zoning and how to support incentives for municipalities and sort of work together to support cities and towns achieving their housing goals and needs of the population. So those are kind of the four broad areas on our policy agenda that we just wanted to highlight. And I'm going to just summarize some of the questions that did come in advance. And then if you're open to kind of then opening it up to folks with the time that we have left. So you mentioned, you talked about on the slide a number of finance tools that the department's looking at or enhancing existing tools. Are there any sort of, can you talk a little bit more about any additional kinds of funding sources or more specifically thinking about ways the department might be working with other agencies to address construction costs and kind of rising costs of housing production?
I do think that you've referenced several of the possible avenues to keeping costs under control or subsidizing en route to keeping costs down. The land use reforms, by leading to greater efficiency and predictability in zoning, planning, and development at the local level, have the potential to make more efficient and therefore more cost-effective development processes. You save money when it takes less time. So that's a way for us as a state to, relative to other states, if we succeed in abbreviating our development processes, making them more predictable, in actually being more competitive for home building in all of its forms. So that's a feature. Another is that we just need to dedicate more state resources to the task. So you've heard me describe a variety of tools that could be the vehicles for more state resources. I will tell you that we are looking at ways of, in this category of how to create tools, we're looking at ways of spreading the cost across years so that there isn't a single year impact that is less plausible and less manageable. And we are looking at potential sources of revenue, whether for this session or a future session, that relate and could even prevent other problems. More to say on all of that in the future. But I think the fundamental answer to your question, Katie, is that we need to save time and therefore money, and we need to invest more.
Thank you. So there were transitioning a little bit. I mean, obviously these are all connected issues, but can you talk a little bit how the department's a little bit more about looking at housing for special populations or different diverse housing needs? In particular, there were several questions that were raised about housing access for folks with disabilities, both physical disabilities and intellectual disabilities. So is there discussion happening about that and how, that need, how the department might be looking at addressing that specific need?
Yeah. What I'll say is that the question is welcome. We've had a good amount of conversation in the department and with stakeholders regarding the variety of priority populations, specialized populations, and vulnerable populations that would benefit from programming tailored to the needs of these communities. And we are eager to continue those conversations with programs that are themselves tailored appropriately. And the main thing I would say today is I don't have program design to offer today, but we are very welcoming of the conversation. And I think we need to make significant progress.
Thank you. And just there's several disability advocates on the call today, stakeholders that are engaged in the effort, and I'm sure can talk more about this and more specifically what they're seeing as well. And then sort of a final kind of broad category issue that came up was thinking about the different regions in Rhode Island and the housing needs, in the western part of the state look very different than in Providence or in the more urban segments of the state. In particular, there were some questions around South County and Southern Rhode Island, but I think it's applicable in other areas as well, where there are increased, you might be seeing increased investor or institutional buyer activity. And in South County, of course, there's the University of Rhode Island, but there's also several colleges and universities in Providence. So the pressures that student housing can put on the rentals in those communities. Are there any strategies, or how are you thinking about strategies to address those issues?
Yeah, as a subset of those very issues, we are concerned about the proliferation of short-term rentals, highly central to the points you were just making, Katie. We hear about it in a variety of places. Quite frankly, the phenomenon is different across the regions of our state, but there's a commonality of concern. So we're looking at short-term rentals and what measures can be undertaken. In some cases, it might be that local initiatives are the best route and we can be supportive or just be an information resource. In some cases, there might be some statewide solutions, but we're with you that this is a set of concerns, not limited to, but including short-term rentals.
Yeah, and so to build on that, there's some questions coming into the chat. So if it's okay to sort of transition to some open questions, and I'm going to ask folks, I'll elevate questions that I see in the chat, but please feel free to use the hand raising feature as well, so we can get to folks. But also, I would encourage everybody to uplift any specific examples or things that you're seeing to contextualize your question or the issue that you want to bring up. So there's a number of housing bills. We are tracking over 200 pieces of legislation, and about 2/3 are specific to housing. Are there any priorities that things are moving quickly, obviously, as you know, but can you share your priorities, Secretary, if there are any identified in the package of bills moving through the General Assembly?
I would say we're looking at all the legislation, and we're trying to be careful about when we weigh in and how, but I will say that Speaker Shikarshi's set of bills, I think there are 14 in the end, that aim to address the efficiency and predictability of those local development processes. I'd say that on the whole, this package is very important. There are still nuances we're analyzing and points we're dialoguing about, but I would say on the whole, they are headed in the right direction and they're a big priority. And I would say that given the fact that they are being initiated in part from the Speaker's office in partnership with key representatives, there's so many individuals who have exercised leadership, but I want to express gratitude to June Speakman for her role as the chair of the Low Mod Commission and also in general in the legislative package and beyond. Those are very important bills. Those are very important bills and we are tracking them closely. I will say that I think it's also very important that we've seen heightened dialogue about how we can protect vulnerable tenants in the market. And you heard me reference quickly the role of RILs and of the good work of Jen and of legal services in our midst. And I think Steve Flores is also on the line. We are very interested in supporting with resources the expansion of legal services so that individuals who are at risk of eviction have legal representation options. And we are also looking at the bills that in multiple ways, directly, indirectly, are in the vicinity of these issues. I just think it's important that our state has a dialogue about this and that we are aiming to balance a healthy market where developers and owners and landlords have a role where they feel like they can produce and where tenants are protected. We need to make sure that we're considering all of these points at once. And we won't solve all these problems in one session, but I think this has the potential to be a session where we air the issues more than we have in maybe many years.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Secretary. I just want to, you touched on this a little bit, so I don't know if you were following in the chat. There was a comment from Heidi Ross about a call that she received from a retired person who got a notice to vacate and is in medical rehab. And thank you, Steve, for offering support from legal services to sort of talk to this person individually. But I building on your comments, Secretary, about the housing stability and evictions prevention measures you're thinking about, are there specific initiatives that you're really considering or prioritizing in this moment? Because I do agree, I think we all agree we need to walk and chew gum at the same time. The housing production is extremely important and that's what we need to do, but also making sure people can remain housed.
Would it be okay if I were to say, in answer to your question, yes, there are provisions that I am and our team is considering most heavily. And what I'd like to express very genuinely is I'd love to get input from this very group on which ones you think are most important before I'm, imposing my own view, because we really are still considering. Would love it.
I think there's many folks in this group that we're happy to give input.
Thank you.
Yes. There is some of this is in, in our legislative agenda too, which I'll be sure to share out. I kind of went through our coalition identified priorities very quickly and at a very high level, but there's some specific pieces embedded as well. There is a question. So some of the more specific things that are just being uplifted by Terry are things, and I think, it's useful to highlight or distinguish, I guess, what you think can be done administratively at the department level versus what needs to be done legislatively or through revisions of statute in some of the eviction work. But they're around right to counsel, eviction diversion. There's a question around no fault evictions, or I guess to flip that, what you might call just cause eviction provision. So I just want to uplift those as initiatives.
Yeah, and I'm seeing those. Thank you for that. It's helpful for your articulation on them and reinforcement of them.
Yeah. And homelessness is certainly very present and top of mind for everybody on this call as well. So Stephanie Geller is asking a question around specifically protections for families facing homelessness when living outside with children. So what protections do you think can be put in place for these folks when there's a mandatory DCYF referral and there are not adequate shelter?
I think we need to build more shelter and more permanent housing that's high quality and accessible to families. I would like to offline perhaps have a member of my team dialogue with anyone with significant insight on the DCYF referral process. We have had dialogue with our colleagues in the HHS space, including DCYF, and have heard different versions of what that referral amounts to and whether it's for beneficial purpose versus putting a family at risk. So would love to, if someone wanted to self-identify, have members of my team dialogue about that more. We're cognizant of it. But I think the fundamental answer here is, sometimes the solutions are hard, but straightforward. And in this case, we need more shelter and more housing.
Yeah, and so thanks, Jennifer Wood. Happy to is stating in the chat, just happy to talk offline about the issues that they see, as well as Terry from DARE. And Brenda, just your comment is more upstream interventions are critical. It's often too late by the time tenants get to eviction court. And rent relief funding has ended, but the need for emergency and short-term rental assistance is critical. Can you maybe just briefly, we only have a couple minutes, but can you talk a little bit about how you're envisioning partnership with our federal delegation as far as resources, knowing that a lot of resources are coming from their end on both production and for things that pertain to homelessness and eviction prevention? Thanks.
Every single member of our federal delegation is prioritizing housing and concerned about homelessness. We are blessed with a delegation that is so accessible and so committed to this. I will say that Senator Jack Reed in particular stands out because he has reached out. He's been dedicated to the housing issue his entire career, as you all know extraordinarily well. And I have personally seen him in action, and he's extraordinary on the issue and has already reached out and wants to do more. So the short answer is, you'd better believe we're going to work closely with our delegation. And I think that if we can continue to innovate, continue to pioneer solutions, if we can generate, for example, I'm not exclusively dedicated to or even necessarily at all this particular solution, but if we were to do a state LIHTC, if we were to create a state low-income housing tax credit, imagine how that would give illustratively Senator Jack Reed even more of an ability to say, my state is ponying up. We're putting skin in the game. We're concerned with our most vulnerable and lowest income residents. What can the federal government do to continue its commitment beyond, if you will, the COVID era of relief? Because these concerns continue, and many of these problems were exacerbated by COVID conditions and the resulting inflationary scenarios, et cetera. So thank you for raising our federal delegation. We're really grateful for them.
Yeah, thank you again, Secretary, for your responses. So And just, another initiative that folks are actively working on here and across the country is rent stabilization. So just uplifting that. And I will just, since we're 1 minute left, if anybody has any other questions, I'm happy to sort of pass those on to your team, Secretary. And thanks for your
Thank you, Katie.
responsiveness.
Would love that.
In addition, we have produced a housing policy guide that I think, again, aligns with some of the initiatives you've described thinking about, but I just think reinforces like there is a commonality and knowledge around these. Some of these are evidence-based, have worked in other places. They could likely work in Rhode Island too. So, there's lots of thought partners on this call and engaged in Homes RI. And I'm hopeful that this is, the first of many convenings that but several convenings we'll have as a coalition with you and your team. So thanks again.
Definitely. And thank you. And every single comment here is helpful. And I do want to maybe single out among already great set of comments, Brenda Clements, always insightful. Thank you for these and for your leadership in general, Brenda. And Katie, really, truly thank you for bringing together this forum. I've seen it over the years. I may not have been exclusively given the time and for that matter, given the authority to work on housing, but I've seen you in action. And this is such an essential coalition. So really appreciate the continuing dialogue, and we look forward to doing a lot more together.
Thank you. We appreciate that. Well, it's 1:45 on the dot, so I like to end on time. As folks know, we try. So we'll close. Thank you for allowing us to record, because a couple folks wanted to be here but couldn't make it. And we'll be in touch, and Homes RI folks, we have our next call coming up on April 16th, I think, but you'll get a notification about this, and we look forward, Secretary Pryor, to continue to collaborate with your department and be a resource, all the stakeholders on this call.
We the same. We look forward to it. Thank you so much.
Thanks again, everybody. Have a good afternoon.